This will be an overview of methods and workflow of working in Cascadeur and then Unreal Engine 5, and less of a step-by-step tutorial. So if you have any questions on anything I go over in this video, let me know in the comments. To start, I have a jump animation that I created previously here in Cascadeur. And I am going to show you how to break this up into 3 different animations: the actual takeoff, the loop, in air loop, and then the landing, and how to set up an animation blueprint inside of Unreal Engine using those jumping animations to get nice jumping mechanic in your game. So how I like to work is first create the whole animation inside of Cascadeur that represents what a typical jump would look like in game. And then take pieces of this and turn those into the separate animations that you'll be using inside of Unreal. So first, for the takeoff, I've copied out the first number of keyframes that represent the takeoff animation. And we could tweak this a bit to our liking. For instance, if I wanted to maybe delay the arms and maybe the head and body even. And then also, usually when I work, I'll save the pre-physics version before we add physics. And then after I apply physics, we'll save that as a separate file because of how adding physics is kind of a destructive process in your animation. If you do it multiple times, the effect is going to keep multiplying on itself, which is usually not what you want. You usually want to add it once into your animation. Although sometimes I have added it twice just to get some extra effect in my animation. But for this, let's see what it looks like with physics, auto physics. So we can see it with an offset here. And then without the offset, I like to overlap it and get a better idea of what it's going to look like. And I'll say, sure, that looks pretty good. So we'll go ahead and we will snap to auto physics, which will take all of our animation and apply the auto physics calculations to it. And now we can turn auto physics off. If we turn auto physics back on, it doesn't line up exactly because it's applying auto physics again on top of what we just did. So we'll turn that off. We already have it applied. It looks okay to me. So going back to what we had, this is the first section, the takeoff of our animation. And we can go ahead and we can save this. Export without meshes. Next, we want to create the in-air loop of the animation. So that's going to be roughly this section of our jump. And we'll want to loop that in a way that looks, decent as it's looping in the air. So if you're falling off a long drop, it'll loop this until you get near the ground again, and then it'll go into the land animation. Okay, so an easy way to get started with this jump loop animation is to choose where you want to start it at. So I'll pick where this hand is kind of horizontal here. Keyframe everything. And then maybe right here, we'll keyframe that. And then we will Alt F to add, and then Alt F again to delete all the keyframes in those intervals, and then drag that section that we want with middle mouse button to the start. And then we can snap it here. So now we have the section of our next animation that we want, and we can simply just save as. Okay, now we have this in its own file, and we can start editing this. Okay, so now one way we can quickly add a looping effect to this is to just copy out this section. So select the interval, hold shift middle mouse, drag it out, and then come up to commands, reverse animation. And now we have it playing in reverse. And this is a duplicate, so we can drag that back in, middle mouse drag it. So now we have this kind of thing going on. And instead of going, you know, up with the arm, maybe we'll want to loop it down. So we can do that real quick. We'll go to here, just move it down. And then here, move it down. Okay. Maybe too far down. And we want a nice circle. And then we can select this and add a cycle. And then you can see it loops continuously. And we can come back here and okay. And now all we want to maybe do here is get rid of this, put the head back in the middle. And instead of fix, we'll do clamped. Okay. And now you'll see we have the same start and end frame. So we actually want to go and change our cycle remove and then add so that our cycle is without that keyframe. And then we'll just bring the animation in by one. Okay. And then we probably want to add some frames in between this to slow it down a little bit. So we can come in here and we can hit the plus key. Drag these out so there's one in the middle here. So if we want maybe another one here, add the plus, select your whole interval, add a plus. Do this all ending keyframe. And then we actually want to, I think, remove this. No, I don't know why this is not looping correctly. So let's take a look. Select our interval. So we can see here, loops nicely. These are different keyframes. We want to make sure that this lines up with this. There we go. Okay, so now we can cycle this, create cycle here, bring in the animation by one. Okay, so now we have a looping kind of following animation. And maybe we have a little too much head movement, so let's go into the head. And let's select this in our interval. So we can see that the head has a lot more movement than we might want, especially from here to here. So maybe we move this one all the way down. Okay, move this down. There we go. And then same thing with the arm. Maybe we give this less twist. Not really sure what's happening here. Let's see. So the arm. Okay, so now we have a decent looking looping smoothly in-air animation that we kind of quickly created from using a combination of the reverse animation command and cycle and just cutting it out of our previous animation. So now we can go ahead and export that without meshes. And then to get our landing animation, we can open back up our rough sketch jump animation. Okay, this is the whole thing. Here we go. Okay, so now we want to do the land. So one way we can do this pretty quick is to go to our takeoff animation that we did previously. And the land is basically just going to be this in reverse. So what we'll do is come in here and then select the whole interval. Go to commands, reverse animation. Okay, so now we have this playing in reverse as a landing animation. And it looks pretty good. One thing we might want to do is say maybe want the legs to reverse. So contact first on the opposite leg to give it some differentiation. So you can go ahead and select the hip and the legs, select your interval, and then just go to the mirror tool, mirror on X-plane, mirror on interval. And it worked pretty good. There's a few strange keyframes here, or strange interpolation frames. So maybe what we do is go back and clamp it so that the fixed interpolation doesn't mess us up. Okay. And maybe for the land, we don't want so much lead-in time. So we could probably start right away from here. So we'll give those all, hit F, give them all keyframes, go here, Alt F again, grab your whole interval, and then middle mouse button, drag it to the start of your animation. And then to reduce the number of frames back down to here. And not bad. We got a couple issues we can quickly fix. So here, it's a little wacky. Bring it in a smidge. This is the right arm, so we don't actually have a keyframe here. So it's this keyframe. Okay, and then maybe here, we give it less rotation forward. Okay, so here, and grab this and rotate it. Why is this doing this to us? Okay, so maybe here we bring it out more. Okay, so here let's keyframe everything. And then we will bring this out and up a bit. And then just rotate it in so that there's less jarring of a rotation. All right, so we say that looks fine. And then maybe we'll take a look at auto physics and see if we like any changes that could give us. So it gives us a little more life in it, a little subtle arm movement, the head, and the other arm. So yeah, we'll say that looks pretty good. And we could disable fixing interpolation first, then we can come up here and snap to auto physics, and then turn that off. And there we go, that's our land animation. Maybe we also just want to keep the chest pointed forward more. Okay, and then we save this. And this can be our takeoff. And then you can export without meshes. Okay, and we're done. So now we have the takeoff, the midair looping, and the landing animations. Okay, so now inside of Unreal, right click, go to import, and import your 3 jump animations: takeoff, landing, and loop. Select your skeleton, hit import all. Okay. So now we have these animations. Okay, so now we have the animations inside of Unreal. We can go to our animation blueprint. And I'll show you how to set up the jump inside of your animation blueprint. Typically, you'll do this inside of the state machine. So you can right click and create a state machine. And you can name this whatever you want. You can name it, normally I do locomotion. Double click. Now you have this kind of empty graph. And if you right click, you'll see 4 options here for comment, conduit, state, and state alias. Typically, you'll be using states. So you go ahead, click a state. You'll have a idle run state, for instance. I'm not going to go into that right now. And then out of the idle run, you'll have your states for jumping. So you can create a... Oops. So you can create 3 more states. You're going to have a takeoff, jump, takeoff, a jump loop, and a jump land. And then you'll connect from your idle run state to your jump takeoff and to your jump loop. From the jump takeoff to the loop, and to the loop to the land, and then the land to the run, idle run. This is a typical setup that I use. The lines here represent how you transition from one state to the other. And if you click it, you'll get all these options here. And if you double click it, you'll go into the graph. So this, whatever your bool you feed into this, will dictate when it'll transition to the connected state. So here I already have some properties set up. So I have an is in air, and I have a is jumping. So for the takeoff, we'll want is jumping, and we'll connect this later to our character controller. So when the actor or the character wants to jump, we'll set this to true so the animation graph can get updated and put them in the jumping animation. So that's all we need there. And then inside the jump takeoff state, you'll have a graph where it wants an output pose. For this, all we need to do is drag in our animations. So this is our takeoff. So we'll drag our takeoff in here and connect it. And there's options here that you can use as well, especially play rate and loop. For this, we won't loop. We'll keep the play rate 1.0. Go back. Now from takeoff to jump loop, we'll do our is_in_error Boolean. And then the jump loop state pose we want is going to be our jump loop animation. We feed that in. And then this one we do want to loop animation. So click the sequence player node and click loop animation. And then for the transition from jump loop to jump land, double click that and drag in our is_in_error. And when this goes to false, so drag in a not bool. When this goes to false, we know that we've landed, and that's when we want to play the land animation. So then go into jump land, drag in your jump land. Oops, wrong one. Drag in your jump land sequence. And no loop, keep it at 1 or whatever you want to change that to. Okay. So now we have the takeoff, the loop, the land, and then the transitions to those states. Now, the transition from idle run to jump loop is going to be is_in_error. And this is because you can run off an edge and then without playing the takeoff animation, go straight into the falling or the jump loop animation. And that's what this transition will let you do. Okay, so for the idle run state, we'll just add in a blend space. So go to here. I have a couple ones set up. I won't go into detail on how to set this up, but I can in a future video. So if you need help with that, let me know. I will just say one thing that I find very useful is to use normalized speeds instead of absolute values, because while playtesting my game, I will frequently tweak the movement speeds of my character, and I don't want to have to come into a blend space and constantly change these values in here. So instead I use values from 0 to 1. So whenever I'm 25% of the way to my max speed, I'll start blending from a walk to a run. And that's one useful tip that I've been using to just speed up iteration time. But okay, so now this is done. And we can feed that straight into an output pose on your animation graph. Okay, so now we need to just set these bools, is jumping, is_in_error. And you can do that in your animation event graph. So I have a bunch of stuff in here, but the main piece is this event blueprint update animation. So I have a character property that I've stored inside of the blueprint initialize animation. So I get the pawn owner, cast my character, and set it. And then inside of this kind of tick event for the animation blueprint, I make sure that that character is valid. The reference to the character is valid. And then I pull off of that the get movement component node into the is falling node, which returns the Boolean for if we're in the air. Because if we're falling, that means we're in the air. So I set that, and then I do some other stuff to set the speed and some other stuff used for my game, aiming, offset, calculation, stuff like that. Now for the is jumping bool, I have a interface method here that gets called from the character controller, and I set is jumping from that. So you can create an interface, right click, go to blueprint, go to blueprint interface, and then give it a name, double click this, and then you can just give this a function like update is jumping. Give it an input, give it your update prop. All right, you can do that, which is what I did do in my interface. So if I go to class settings, you go to implemented interface, that's where you add your interfaces. So I have a BPI animation blueprint interface that has a update is jumping function. And the reason you do that is so inside of your character, so here's my character class, I have all my input handlings, and if I find my jump right here, we can get our animation instance and just call update is jumping straight off of that without having to cast it. That's one of the useful aspects of using interfaces. And then my animation instance is a just a anim instance object reference that I set on begin play. So right here, you pull off your mesh, your skeletal mesh, get anim instance node, and then cache that value inside of a property on your class. And for my jumping, I have an input action. I won't go into how to set up input actions, but if that's something you need help with, just let me know. I pull off the started and completed. When we start jumping from the input, we update is jumping in animation blueprint. This starts the takeoff animation. And then I have a dispatch that I use here for on airborne start that I won't get into. In a future video, I'll go over what this does. This ties into my physical animation system so that we can get some physics blending on our animations in real time. And then I have a short delay, and then I actually jump the character. This will actually propel the character up in the air. And this is dictated by the jump properties on the movement component. So if you go to your character movement component, type in jump. So the jumping, falling values here, in particular jump z velocity, this will dictate how high you jump, for instance. And you can go in and read in detail of what all these values will do, but that's the main important one, is how high you want to jump. And then lastly, once I have actually jumped the character, I'll go back to the anim instance and I'll update the jump is jumping to false, because we've already jumped. Now this works well in my setup because I use this delay. And the reason I use this delay is because it adds a little bit of syncing between the takeoff and the actual jumping part of my animation. So if you go back to the animation for your takeoff, and go to takeoff. So here, this is 12 frames. And it isn't until about frame 5 or 6 that you actually start getting vertical and actually do the jump. So if you want to wait this couple number of frames before you actually propel your character in the air, it makes it feel a little better. Instead of starting to go vertical, obviously, even though this plays really fast, you'll still kind of notice it. It kind of gives that slippy, slidey feel, which you probably want to avoid. And there's a lot of ways to do this. You can probably do this with an animation notify or reading in some value in your anim graph and then waiting to trigger a jump through that. But for my purposes, because I don't really care about the exact timing, I just want to slightly delay it. I find that that's good enough because of how fast my takeoff is, and I can come in here and easily tune that value. It's no big deal. So I like doing it this way. And then the end result of all this is and I don't know why it's getting stuck. Let's see. Oh, okay. Lastly, we're going to set up the transition bool for when it can go from landing to idle. And a nice way to do this is to type in the sequence animation name. So ours is jump land here. And use the ratio of time remaining. And we'll say if we're almost done with our land animation, we'll transition out and into idle. For us, we'll say maybe 15. So if there's only 15% remaining in the land animation, we'll start transitioning to idle. So now, come in here, and there you go. You can see it plays the takeoff into a jump loop and into the land. And if I just run off the edge, it goes right into the is falling state, is in air state, and plays the jump loop. And then that's pretty much it. There's a bunch of other details like the locomotion, some of the blending, and then you'll see kind of how this arm, especially the left arm, is flopping around. That's not from the animation we just created. That is blending that animation with some physics in real time using the physical animation component. I'll be doing a video on that in the future. So if that's something interesting to you, let me know in the comments. I'll make sure I prioritize that. But that is how you can pretty quickly go from creating your own jump animations inside of Cascadeur and then setting up an animation blueprint in Unreal to get your character airborne, looking good, flailing around in the air, you know, jumping, doing its best, living its best life, looking good while it's doing it. Now, I will say one thing that I did in my jump animation, you could see how the character leans forward. That is something I plan on changing and instead dynamically tilting the player based on their velocity direction when they jump. Because obviously if you jump in place, it looks super out of place. And I kind of overlooked that when I was thinking about it, when I was designing the animation. Because otherwise you're always jumping in the forward direction in my game because of how the locomotion is set up. So it looks fine there, but yeah, standing still doesn't look as good, doesn't look very natural. So I'll be making that change to my setup. And then eventually I'm going to do a full breakdown tutorial on my entire animation blueprint and player controller. and inputs. So that'll go into detail on how I created this kind of Souls-like character piloting in Unreal Engine, from how to create the animations in Cascadeur, how to set up the animations inside of Unreal, how to do your character movement and input mappings, all that good stuff. That's going to be a big one. I'll probably break that down into its own little video series because it's going to be too long to fit in one video. But that's it. If you have any questions, I know I kind of skipped a few pieces of the puzzle. This wasn't meant to be a full A to Z tutorial, but hopefully that helps give you a template on how you can go about doing this in your own game. So thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.